In the cold administrative language of medieval England, a 3-year-old child became a wife. The chapel records from Elmwood in Kent, dated June 27, 1316, document a marriage ceremony that joined Elizabeth de Badlesmere to Sir Edmund Mortimer, a boy likely between 10 and 15 years old. This was not romance. This was political architecture, built on the bodies of children. Medieval marriage contracts functioned as instruments of power, binding families through legal agreements that transformed children into assets. Elizabeth's story reveals the machinery of noble England, where a girl's name in a ledger carried more weight than her voice, and where political rebellion could strip away everything, including childhood itself. This is the documented history of England's youngest bride. Context: the world of noble marriage, 045 to 232. Understand Elizabeth's fate. We must first understand the system that created it. In early 14th century England, noble families operated within a carefully calibrated economy of alliance and inheritance. Marriage was the primary technology for consolidating power, and the church permitted betrothals of children as young as 7, with marriages contracted even earlier. These unions were not consummated until both parties reached maturity, typically around 12 for girls and 14 for boys by ecclesiastical law. But the legal reality began immediately. Property rights, wardships, inheritance claims, all followed the signing of parchment and the exchange of vows spoken by children who could barely comprehend them. Elizabeth de Badlesmere was born into this system around 1313. Daughter of Bartholomew de Badlesmere and Margaret de Clare, her father served as steward in the royal household of Edward II, a position of considerable influence that placed him close to the machinery of kingship. Her mother was niece to an earl, a woman who understood that noble women were expected to administer estates, enforce household discipline, and when necessary, defend family interests. The Badlesmere family held estates and offices. Elizabeth's life was immediately legible as political currency. Her marriage to Edmund Mortimer, arranged when she was 3, connected the Badlesmeres to one of England's most powerful families. Roger Mortimer, Edmund's father, was a rising magnate whose alliance offered protection and promise. For families like the Badlesmeres, such connections were essential insurance in a world where political fortunes shifted with dangerous speed. The siege and fall to 32 for 30. The stability of Elizabeth's childhood shattered in October 1321, when her mother made a decision that would destroy the family. Queen Isabella, wife of Edward II, was traveling through Kent with her retinue and requested accommodation at Leeds Castle, a Badlesmere property. Margaret de Clare, acting as castellan in her husband's absence, refused entry to the Queen's men. Contemporary chronicles record what happened next with stark brevity. The refusal was treated as an armed insult. Queen Isabella's escorts were attacked. Several were killed. This was not a minor social slight, it was an intentional assertion of authority that signaled participation in the broader baronial resistance against the king's favorite, Hugh Despencer. The crown's response was immediate and overwhelming. Royal forces laid siege to Leeds Castle. The siege lasted approximately 1 week. When the castle fell, Margaret de Clare and her children, including 8-year-old Elizabeth, were taken into royal custody. Bartholomew de Badlesmere, who had joined the rebellion of the Lords Ordainers, was now marked for destruction. The administrative machinery of treason processed the Badlesmere family with bureaucratic efficiency. Writs ordered the seizure of property. Household accounts recorded the costs of maintaining noble prisoners. Parliamentary rolls documented the indictment. On April 14, 1322, Bartholomew de Badlesmere was executed for treason at Canterbury. His estates were forfeit to the crown. His widow and children became problems to be managed by royal officers. Imprisonment for 30 to 530. For Elizabeth, now approximately 9 years old, the consequence was immediate confinement. The evidence for her imprisonment comes from custodian rolls and household returns that list noble wards and their maintenance costs, while the exact location is debated by historians. Records suggest she was held at the Tower of London or similar royal fortresses used for high-profile prisoners. The Tower in this period functioned less as a dungeon and more as a managed residence for those whose detention required official notice. But for a child, the reality was severe. Movement restricted, company limited to approved retainers, childhood interrupted by the rhythms of custody rather than play. Household accounts from the period include payments for food, bedding, and occasionally for prisoners' schooling or medical care. These dry administrative entries allow historians to reconstruct the ordinary chronology of her confinement, seasons passing within stone walls. While outside those walls, political negotiations continued. Elizabeth's imprisonment served multiple purposes. It was punishment for her father's treason, leverage against remaining Badlesmere allies, and a demonstration of the crown's reach. In the calculus of medieval power, a 9-year-old girl was a useful instrument. Her marriage to Edmund Mortimer, contracted when she was 3, now became her potential salvation. Elizabeth's fortune shifted dramatically in 1326 when Roger Mortimer, her father-in-law, returned from exile and helped Queen Isabella overthrow Edward II. Mortimer became the de facto ruler of England, exercising power at the center of government during the minority of the young Edward III. With Mortimer's ascendancy, the legal architecture that had condemned the Badlesmere family began to reverse. Pardons were issued, Attainders were reversed. Petitions for restoration of estates moved through chancery. Documents from this period record grants that returned confiscated property to formerly dispossessed families when political winds changed. For Elizabeth, this meant liberation from custody and integration into one of the most powerful households in the realm. She moved from constrained prisoner to beneficiary of Mortimer's triumph. The household that had been stripped to skeleton staff expanded. The material conditions of her life improved dramatically. Larger chambers, more servants, the rituals of court life replacing the austerity of a prison diet. But this restoration came with new vulnerabilities. Mortimer's power rested on precarious foundations. His influence attracted enemies, and his exercise of authority grew increasingly autocratic. In 1330, the young King Edward III, now 17, orchestrated a coup. Mortimer was arrested at Nottingham Castle, tried before Parliament, and executed on November 29, 1330. Elizabeth's husband, Edmund Mortimer, died shortly afterward, in late 1331 or early 1332, whether illness or the stress of his father's fall killed him. The result was the same. Elizabeth, approximately 19 years old, became a widow with two young sons, Roger and John. Widowhood and remarriage, 7 o'clock to 8:30. Medieval widowhood presented both danger and opportunity. As mother to minor heirs of the Mortimer title, Elizabeth held significant value. Her elder son Roger would eventually inherit as 2nd Earl of March, but as a child his lands required guardianship and management. The question of who would control that guardianship, and therefore the considerable Mortimer estates, made Elizabeth a valuable marriage prospect. In 1335, Elizabeth married William de Bohun, Earl of Northampton. This union required a papal dispensation due to kinship ties between the Mortimer and Bohun lines. The dispensation survives in ecclesiastical registers, bureaucratic proof of the marriage's legitimacy. William de Bohun was an experienced military commander and a man of significant royal standing. The marriage was strategic calculation. It healed previous enmity between families, provided protection to Elizabeth and her sons, and offered a patron whose closeness to Edward III could shield the Mortimer inheritance during her son's minority. For Elizabeth, the marriage meant security and status as Countess of Northampton. Property settlements show how dowries and jointures were carefully arranged to secure the future of children from both marriages. The couple had at least two children, Humphrey de Bohun, born in 1342, who would inherit multiple titles, and Elizabeth de Bohun, who married Richard Fitzalan, Earl of Arundel. Legacy and lineage. 830 to 930. Elizabeth's significance extends beyond her personal story. Through her descendants, her blood entered the royal line of England. Her granddaughter Mary de Bohun married Henry Bolingbroke, who seized the throne as Henry IV in 1399. Every English monarch from Henry IV forward, including the current royal family, descends in part from the 3-year-old bride of 1316. When Elizabeth's brother, Giles de Badlesmere, died without heirs in 1338, his estates were divided among his sisters. As Crest, Elizabeth received substantial property that bolstered the Bohun estates and increased her economic standing. Inquisitions, post-mortem and feudal rolls document this partition with characteristic medieval precision. In her later years, Elizabeth acted within the channels available to noblewomen: patronage of religious houses, management of estates, arrangement of marriages for younger relations. Her will, made on May 31, 1356, itemizes bequests and requests burial at the Church of the Black Friars in London. The document reflects both piety and an acute awareness of status. She died in 1356, approximately 43 years old. Conclusion: 9:30 to 10 o'clock. Elizabeth de Badlesmere's life spans the distance between powerlessness and agency within medieval England's rigid structures. Married at 3, imprisoned at 8, widowed at 19, she navigated a world where women's bodies were instruments of policy and children's names appeared in ledgers before they could write them. The documents that preserve her story, marriage contracts, prison accounts, wills, property transfers, speak in the cold language of administration, but they map a human trajectory: a child who survived imprisonment, a widow who secured her children's inheritance, a woman who converted early victimization into a generative position within the noble networks that governed England. Her legacy is written in genealogical charts and property records, in the blood of kings and the administrative traces of a system that valued pedigree over personhood. Elizabeth de Badlesmere endured, and in enduring, anchored a line that would shape English history for centuries to come.